Welcome to week 2 and the study of sport business and the media, how these two things in our society have influenced sport and how sport has influenced them. We will talk mostly in this presentation about the business side, and the media will have to be gotten in your reading. And because you have studied the media and some of the other courses, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the business side of pro sport, college sport, and recreational sport. We will begin by our little spiritual application that we do every week with Freedom's Christian Heritage. If you remember, in our first week, we started Freedom's Christian Heritage to talk about the heritage of our country and how it was formed on Christian principles. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord is a verse that we've taken to discuss this part of our spiritual application to sport and society. In our first week, we talked a little bit about the schools like Harvard and the basis upon which that school was formed in 1636, which shows how old and how foundational the founding of our country was upon Christian principles. In this week, I'd like to just mention several of the godly men who were involved in writing the principles of our country that were upon which it was founded, and some of the things that they have been quoted as saying with relationship to what they feel and felt at that time was the proper foundation of the United States. For example, Benjamin Franklin, when he would get involved in writing the Constitution, he made this statement: "I have lived a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. I therefore move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberation be held at this assembly every morning before we proceed to business," unquote. Benjamin Franklin felt that since God rules the affairs of men, that as they began to write the documents for this country, that prayer should be given. And then George Washington said, quote, "No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than these of the United States," unquote. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than these of the United States, unquote. And he was saying, of all people in the world, we should be bound to recognize and adore the invisible hand, i.e. God, which conducts the affairs of men. Daniel Webster made the comment, quote, "I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God." And Andrew Jackson, quote, "The Bible, sir, is the rock on which our republic rests." When you hear what these men, our founding fathers, thought about our country and upon the principles which is founded, it makes you take pause to think about what our country is today, and do these principles still work? Are they still part of what we're supposed to be in our society? Is God and should God be the center part? Is He the one who will bless our nation if we put Him first? And as we go through these every week, just for a few minutes, and talk about the different areas upon which our country was governed, I want you to be thinking as you head toward the paper that I'm asking you to write about how you think this relates to our sports society and our society in general, and the leadership and the type of leadership that you would like to exemplify in Freedom's Christian Heritage. Sport is a business, and we all know that because we're together taking sport and society, and there we have a course just about the finance of sport. And we are close right now to $500 billion, that's B, billion, dollars in the spending in the economy of the sport world. And if it is a professional sport, it has a corporate structure, and where the athletes are workers, and the team and the bottom line are what's emphasized. Of course, what we are familiar with in college athletics, and you as athletes, or me as a coach, whatever you may be as a prospective coach, is that it's not such of a corporate structure. But as we get into this chapter and talk about the business of college sports, that is a very hot issue right now, as you all know. And this all happened, and your book talks about this as industrialization took place. People stopped working for themselves and went into the corporate world, and everything got bigger, and sport got bigger, and this is what really ended up making something that was more like play into more like business. The area of professional sport is the corporate style of business in sport, and we need to talk just about some key things that will help you understand the business of sport from the professional side. First of all, most owners are wealthy, powerful males. That's who the majority of owners, that's their demographic. They're powerful, and they're wealthy, and they're men. Secondly, more and more teams now are owned by corporations. Fewer teams now are owned by a single person, but it is a corporation that really owns them. Very few of them are owned by the public. I think the Green Bay Packers, as mentioned in your book, is one of them that are owned by the people in the general public who own shares in the team. And the sport team is a business investment or a means of promoting other products. And for example, if Corporation A owns Pro Sport B, they own it to promote the selling of the products of the corporation, and they use the sport to sell and be profitable in their corporations. So they all are run a little bit differently, but if you've taken our intro class, or if you've been involved in another class that had you buy the subscription to the Sport Business Journal, which every person in sport management studying needs to know about, you'll see that so many of the articles in that magazine, the Sport Business Journal, which is the really considered by some as the Bible of sport business, so much of those articles written in that journal, which is weekly, are about professional sports, its ownerships, who they are, and how they're making money. Let's talk a little bit to give you just an overview of how the pro sports and the professional ownerships of these sports make money. First of all, they make it through appreciation. The NFL teams, they have increased 5 times in value in the past 15 years. 5 times in value. And if you look up each one of these teams, you'll see how much they are worth. And you can tell that by, if you read the news or stay up with sports, which I'm sure a lot of you do, when one is sold. I remember a few years ago the Clippers were sold, and I think it was $1 billion that he paid for it. The Dodgers have had some of their ownership changed, and so much of this is based on appreciation, and what financial success and fan appreciation, so forth, has indicated that it has appreciated in value. Taxes. When the bottom line is a loss, they can write it off on other businesses if corporations own them. So they make money that way. Their corporation makes money. And there are some pro teams that have losses, so the loss in this can be written off. Then depreciation. Players are assets that depreciate. That sounds pretty cold, but in the business world of sport with professional athletes, that's exactly right. They are assets to the corporation, but they lose their value, and when they depreciate, there's an ability for that to be written off and more money to be made. Revenue and ticket sales is another way. I think a lot of us feel that that's probably the biggest way, but it really isn't. Revenue and ticket sales is one that's more visible, but that's only one of many of these areas where they can make money. Venue revenue, if they own the venue that it's played in, many of them do now, or sometimes it's owned by the cities. They get some share of what that venue makes. So all of these revenue streams and all of these methods make pro sports just such a tremendous part of the business world. And then media revenue, and this is the big one. 15 to 60% of the team's total revenue comes from the media. Who has the NFL contract? Who has the NBA contract? Who has some of the college sports contracts? The contracts even in college sports are just astronomical, but you put those over there into who has Major League Baseball, how much these networks pay the sports for exclusivity to produce and televise and stream and all of the other ways that people can watch the sport. To continue from our last slide, there are more ways that we have not discussed and outlined about how pro sports make money. The next one is from licensed merchandise. If you look around all the stars, LeBron James, Ohtani, the new baseball player for the Angels, Kobe Bryant, all of the ones in the soccer world, the ones that you know, the stars in the sport that's a favorite one of yours, they sell shirts and hats and memorabilia, and they're licensed, meaning that those are the official ones, and the pro teams make money off of this merchandise, a lot of it. And if you really want to get into this a little bit more, you would go into a sport and break down these revenue streams and say how much money do they make from each one, and then you will have a financial of that sport. Very interesting study to make. Another one is increased revenue from TV and ticket sales for hosted playoff games. For example, in the baseball world, when teams make the playoffs, they get more ticket sales and they get more revenue from the TV people who have the licensed contract, the exclusive contract. And if they host that baseball game, all of that stuff, all of those items goes into making more revenue for those teams. That's why, of course, they all want to make the playoffs, not just for the fame of winning, but for the bottom line, which is when you get into the business of professional sports, that's what it's about, the bottom line. And then you have this little kind of a domino effect. The playoff teams have higher attendance, and as they have higher attendance, brings more success. And the success then brings more sponsorship. We have a young lady who works for Gatorade who comes to our online on-ground classes here at Hope and talks about Gatorade sponsorship of not only teams but of athletes and how they make money through Gatorade because of these teams that promote and sell their product exclusively. So this is a huge part of the business of sport, is professional sports. All sports that need to play have to have places to play. And one of the biggest areas in sport business is the financing of the stadium where they play. New stadium costs are several $100 million since 1991. Two-thirds of it has come from public funds in baseball and football. This is always a big controversy, and it's one of the ones that we're going to ask you to discuss in this week about the financing of stadium. It's usually public or private or a combination of both of them. Like in the public, financing is from sales tax. Sometimes they'll float a new tax levy or bond for the public to finance it. It's beneficiary taxes or bed taxes from hotels and bonds and the tax increments that the public is asked a lot of times to vote for. And when the public says, no, we're not going to pay taxes for that when our streets are terrible, but somehow they would rather have terrible streets than not have a stadium and have a pro team to support. It kind of shows what has happened with sport and our society. It's one of those tremendous effects that we talk about through the whole course, that it's interesting to come down to that simple little thing that individual A would vote yes for stadium financing for a professional team and no for education or infrastructure improvement. But it is so big and it's so much a part of the psyche in the society of the United States and around the world that this is how sport has become such a business and so big. And then you sometimes have private financing. The owner finances it. The football team that just moved to Southern California is owned, and the stadium is owned and operated along with the team by the owner. And sometimes the league makes contributions, and then if it's private, people have to get back bank loans and local business loans and all kinds of things like personal seat licenses, and you can read a little bit more in your textbook. But just to have an overview about how the venue in which all of these sports teams play, how they're financed, this is just an overview of that. While sport is a business, it's also a monopoly. And these 5 areas are things that I thought would be good for you to just review as we go through this presentation. It comes down to this: I own it, and I don't want anybody else to own it. And it shows the greed in our country. It shows the selfishness in our society. And these are 5 ways where sport can be in a monopoly, where the owners control all the competition and they control all the sales. I own Team A. I'm going to say who we play. I'm going to say when we play them, and I'm going to say how much it costs for anybody to come and see us play. Usually don't control the competition very much, but they try to. And then the leagues, they don't want a new league. I remember when the women's WNBA came into being, the only way that league would survive and has survived is for the NBA owners to kind of take them under their wing. But without them, they couldn't have done it. If the NBA didn't want a WNBA, there wouldn't have been a WNBA. And that was not a league that competed with the NBA, so it was okay. It was different people playing the sport, but not competing for tickets, because the people that go to each one of those are typically of different demographic styles. And then drafted players. If you're a player, you're an employee, to some just part of the equipment. You can only negotiate with one team. That changes off and on with the leagues. And then if you want a new team or an expansion team, that team must pay large fees, and other teams need to approve that. So you don't have a lot of individual freedom within the sport because they are so much of a monopoly. And then, except in certain circumstances, owners can't individually sell merchandise. They can't. They have to have it out to the corporation, or you can't do it just as a person. But all of these things make sport a monopoly. It's very hard to get in. It's very hard to be a part of it. Even some of the advertising that goes on in sport is very hard to get the niche in that sport where there isn't an advertisement, and then the owners and the corporations are the only ones that have anything to say about it. Another area of professional sport and the business of sport in the professional world is the management versus labor situation that always is going on anytime there is a business. And these are some things that you might just want to think about as you think about sport in our society. Players can negotiate with only one team when they are drafted. You can look up all the details of that, but that has a lot of implications for a player and also for management. They want the player to stay, and the player doesn't want to stay. And there are rules about how they can leave, or vice versa. They don't want to. Management doesn't want them, but they can't get rid of them. So there's all kinds of areas in this management versus labor area that make it very much a business. Wages are limited by salary caps and performance conditions. We all know about salary caps, and teams can only spend so much sometimes as a whole team, and then sometimes as a rookie they can only give so much to a rookie, and all of this is indicated from the leagues and from the people who own all of these teams. The average length of a pro sport career is less than 10 years. And a lot of times we see how much these athletes make and we think, oh, they're set for life. But making it to the pros does not necessarily mean an athlete is set for life. Some of it is because they don't manage their money. They don't figure out what they're going to do. If they're only there 10 years, some of them go in out of high school. Figure out that's 20. They're 28 and they're done. Or out of college, 22. They're 32 and they're done. That's the average length. Certainly, some stay longer, but they get millions and millions of dollars and they don't manage it. And then, if you look up how much every athlete makes in every sport team, you'll find that, like in baseball, many of them don't even make $1 million. And they've made it to the pros. Well, they just have a high-paying job if they're in six figures. But even those who make millions of dollars do not necessarily have enough to live on because they spend it about as fast as they make it. Two more slides in this presentation. We'll quickly talk about collegiate sport as a business, and then we'll talk about recreation for just a little bit and the amount of money that is involved in that. We've all been pretty much familiar with college sports because I've spent 35 years of my life, all but 2 in colleges, different ones, 6 different ones that I've been a part of either as a coach or as an administrator. And I've learned over these years that college sport, by its definition, doesn't want to be known as a business, but it is. Because the bottom line, can you bring in more money than you spend? Can you spend less than you have? And many departments run businesses with huge budgets. Some that I've been in have been astronomically large. Some have been very small. And you understand why athletes go to the big schools with the big budgets, because they have a lot more perks, a lot more help, a lot more people. However, as it gets bigger, it gets more and more less like college sports. It becomes more of a business, and athletes then become employees. And that's one of the biggest things going on right now in college sports. Should they be considered employees and paid accordingly? Big programs can increase enrollment, and they can contribute to other departments. For example, these big football schools that make more money than they spend within their own department, they can take the excess money and give it to other departments in the college and university, and then because they are so well known because of their football or their men's basketball programs, they have students that want to go there. They want to go be a part of the Michigan Wolverines or the Indiana Hoosiers or the UCLA Bruins or whatever these sports are in college. They have so much money based on their TV rights now. That's where they're getting all their money now. Again, they have their own broadcasting station. The Pac-12 station, the SEC has one, the Big Ten has one, and now they have their own television stations where they bring in money from advertising for those, and then they have the exclusive rights to them. I know that where I live in Southern California, I have DirecTV, for example, and DirecTV cannot make an agreement with the Pac-12 to carry their Pac-12 channel on DirecTV. It's probably a little of both. It's that DirecTV does not want to raise that much fee to their customers, but somebody has to take the fees because they have to pay the Pac-12 for their right to have them on their channel, and they won't do it. And so if I sit down and want to watch a Pac-12 sport, I can't get that channel on DirecTV. I hope someday down the line they will make that agreement. But colleges that's a revenue stream for them. What DirecTV and Dish and Spectrum will pay that college, that athletic program, to have their sports on their provider. Money in the college sports comes from a lot of the same things as pro sports: sales, licensing, corporate sponsors, TV rights, and then you have to figure in what it costs for them to bring athletes there. And now the correct and legal scholarship is room, board, fees, and books, plus the total cost of attendance. So it used to be just room, board, fees, and books. Now you can give athletes all of that, plus more money that's figured into the cost of attendance, clothing, food. Even though they get food, it's more money for food. And where you go to these huge universities with huge feeding places, dormitories, and cafeterias for their athletes, where these kids stay, what kind of help they have, is all about money, and that's usually produced by big football programs and big men's basketball programs. That's where a lot of outside money does come from. So with all this money that comes and goes in college sports, what do we have about net gain or loss if it is truly operated like a business? Only 50 to 60% of Division I football, bowl championship series football teams, and men's basketball operate in the black. That means that at least half are red on the bottom line at the end of a year. I've worked in some schools that have that. All of a sudden, you're getting toward the end and you realize that you've spent money you don't have. And that's the thing that's very difficult in college sports, because a lot of times you can't wait till you get the money before you spend it. You're always a year, 2 years, 3 years ahead in scheduling. You're ahead trying to predict what the revenue from A, B, and C will be, and you have to go ahead and spend money to keep it going, and then all of a sudden that money doesn't come in. I remember in one place that I worked, there was a wrestling program that was funded pretty much by one donor, and he gave a sizable amount of money to keep that wrestling team going. Well, the year started and the wrestling team went, traveled, bought their gear, spent all their money that they needed to operate, and at the end of the year when the donor gave the money, he didn't give it. So this huge sum of money ended up being their bottom line in red. We always called that soft dollars. They're soft until they become hard. They're soft until the athletic program really has them. And because of this, a lot of them do not operate in the black. The median annual net loss for all of these colleges is $15 million. These are the ones that are in the big football FBS series in football. And then in 2016, 24 of 120 colleges in Division I had positive net revenue from athletics. That just means they spend more money than they make and that they bring in. They can bring in money, but if they spend more, then certainly they're in the red. And people don't understand this a lot of times. They think, oh, they bring in the money, look at all the money they have. Well, if they spend more than they have, then they're not profitable, and the university then has to figure out a way to bail them out of the debt that they accrue. On this last slide in this presentation, just real quickly, just a couple things about recreational sports as business. The more leisure time we have, the more recreational sports grow. And as we have time to join health clubs and play in leagues and play golf and tennis and get involved in so many things, then recreational activity does increase. I think it's interesting, it's sports equipment. An average $44 billion a year in the United States that we spend on recreational sporting equipment. I don't think I will ever not love gear. If you've been an athlete or a coach, you always just like athletic gear. No matter how old you are, I like shoes and I like warm-ups and all kinds of athletic-looking gear. And whether you spend a lot to participate or just to wear it, that's part of recreational sport as businesses that all the sporting goods stores. And, a lot of these retail stores are really kind of going out of business now because of what you can buy online. But still, that's all part of recreational sport. Recreational sports don't have a lot of revenue streams, but one of the streams they do have is that you have to pay to play. And if you have a child that wants to play soccer for many years, you have to pay for that child to play. And then those fees that are brought in by these leagues, that money is used sometimes to maintain the areas where these recreational activities take place. These rec sports that have clubs, that is another big moneymaker for the owner of the clubs. And we've had some students here at Hope now making a living owning club teams, and they live off the fees of the parents that want their kids to have opportunities to either earn scholarships or play throughout their high school years. So all of this is part of recreational sport as business. There's so much more than what we've gone over in the presentation, but at least it's an overview of pro sports, college sports, and rec sports, and hopefully you will pick up the detail as you read the text.